Ladies and gentlemen, I hope and pray that you are fine wherever you are. I am okay, and I welcome you back again to another series of African and global politics, and a platform where we share issues that affect us every day. Today, I want to remind us of a great politician, a great Pan-Africanist, and a great African leader whose thoughts, whose knowledge, and whose influence impact the current generations and shape the experiences of future leaders and generations. I am talking about the first Nigerian president, that is Nnamdi Azikiwe, Benjamin Azikiwe, who became president of Nigeria between 1963 and 1966. Now, I want to refer us to a speech by Nnamdi Benjamin Azikiwe, which he delivered on October 23rd, 1949, during the Plenary Session of the British Peace Congress, which was held at the Lime Grove Baths in London. Nnamdi Azikiwe was addressing colonialists and urging them to grant independence to African states. Remember, by this time, in 1949, there was no African state that had gained independence. It was in 1949, that was the post-World War II era. And now, in this address, Nnamdi Benjamin Azikiwe addressed the colonialist, but in a way, in his speech, he was speaking to Africans. Nnamdi Azikiwe stated, and I quote, "Take a look at the map of Africa. You will notice that its contour presents a shape which reminds one of a ham bone. To some people, this ham bone has been designed by destiny for the carving knife of European imperialism. To others, it is a question mark which asks whether Europe will act up to its ethical professions of peace and harmony." Then Nnamdi Azikiwe extends his speech and says a very important point. "Yet the paradox of Africa is that its wealth and resources are among the root causes of wars." If you allow me, I can repeat Nnamdi Azikiwe's speech, which, according to me, it was a direct address to Africans, but in his speech, he was addressing the British and other colonizers. "Take a look at the map of Africa. You will notice that its contour presents a shape which reminds one of a ham bone. To some people, this ham bone has been designed by destiny for the carving knife of European imperialism. To others, it is a question mark which asks whether Europe will act up to its ethical professions of peace and harmony. Yet the paradox of Africa is that its wealth and resources are among the root causes of wars." And I close the quote. Remember, Nnamdi Azikiwe delivered this speech in 1949. And if you analyze closely the speech, it shows and it clarifies what is happening in Africa today. Nnamdi Azikiwe was very specific, and he was very eloquent by saying that Africa, the paradox of Africa is that its wealth and resources are among the root causes of war. Today, many African countries are at war. There is war in DR Congo. Why? Because of resources. There is war in Central African Republic. Why? Because of resources. There is an ongoing war in Somalia. Why? Because of resources. There is an ongoing war in Ethiopia. Why? The same reasoning, resources. There is an ongoing war in Sudan. Fight over resources. There is an ongoing war in many Libya and many other African countries just because of fight and competition over resources. Now, Nnamdi Azikiwe is putting African leaders to task. He predicted that the greatest paradox, the greatest challenges, and the root causes of problems, conflicts, wars in Africa is their resources. Now, if Africans are to avoid war, then all that they must do is to protect their resources and ensure equitable distribution of these resources. I think Africans have deviated from what Nnamdi Azikiwe, the Africa that Nnamdi Azikiwe foresaw. Nnamdi Azikiwe foresaw a prosperous Africa. He foresaw an Africa that was disconnected from the world in terms of Western control, if I may say so. He wanted an Africa that is independent. He wanted an Africa that is functional. He wanted an Africa that was in peace. In the same speech, Nnamdi Azikiwe reminded Africans, and I quote, "Peace is indivisible. One half of the world cannot enjoy peace while the other half lives in throes of war." Nnamdi Azikiwe was reminding Africans that being at peace in Africa is not enough. Africans might enjoy peace, but if the world is still fighting, if the world is still at war, then it means that Africans will be embroiled in this war. You can see today a war is ongoing in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and the after effects of this war is experienced in Africa. That is the truth. Africans are, if you assess the functioning of the current governments, many of their presidents will cite the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine as an impediment to economic progress. In my country, Kenya, the president attributed the economic hardships to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. But Kenya is not fighting in Russia or Ukraine, but Russia and Ukraine are fighting, and the after effects of this war affects Africa. This is true to what Nnamdi Azikiwe said, that peace is indivisible. One half of the world cannot enjoy peace while the other half lives in throes of war. What can Africans do? What are Africans' contribution to end this war? I don't know what to say, because in Africa we don't have the military capacity to fight the wars that Russia and Ukraine are fighting. We don't have the experience to fight the wars that Ukraine and Russia are fighting. What should we do? That is a question that I would want my audience to answer. What should Africa do to prevent the ongoing wars? Because Nnamdi Azikiwe said that peace is indivisible. That means that if the other part of the world is fighting and Africa is at peace, at some point Africa will feel the influence of the war, and Africa will be embroiled in the war. I want to talk to African leaders, and I want to address African presidents using a speech that Nnamdi Azikiwe gave on the same session, during the same session with the British. Nnamdi Azikiwe said, and I think with this speech he was agitating for the independence of all African states, not only Nigeria. He was agitating for the independence of all African states. Nnamdi Azikiwe said, and I quote in his speech, "We demand the right to assume responsibility for the government of our country. We demand the right to be free to make mistakes and profit from our experiences." Nnamdi Azikiwe was fighting for African independence. He was fighting for the sovereignty of African governments. He was fighting for the detachment of African governments from the colonizers. And he wanted a government of Africans, by Africans, and for Africans. He wanted an Africa which is controlled by its leaders. What do we see today in Africa? The Africa we see today is an Africa which has delegated its leadership duties to the colonizers again. Africa has invited colonizers. If you see the kind of interactions between Africa and the other parts of the world, Africa has completely delegated its duties to the same colonizers that Nnamdi Azikiwe was fighting against. Nnamdi Azikiwe was very specific. He was very emotional. He was very courageous. As a founding father of Africa, he desired an Africa which is self-functioning. He desired an Africa which is sovereign. He desired an Africa which is protective of its resources. I want to say that African leaders have failed the founding fathers. African leaders have betrayed the founding fathers. Nnamdi Azikiwe wanted an Africa which is detached from the West, an Africa which is completely detached from the colonizers. I don't mean detached in a way that we create blockages, no trade, no nothing, but an Africa which is capable of making its own decisions. Today, African countries rely on colonizers to make decisions. African leaders rely on the West, on the colonizers, to organize elections. African leaders rely on the colonizers to access resources. If Africa is to proceed, then we must remember what Nnamdi Azikiwe said in 1949. Thank you and God bless you.